Hey, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode. This one is a little bit long, but we do actual spawning, so we have a very big script in front of us, and this is what happens when we start the game. We get some object to spawn, we get a lot of prefab to spawn, and they spawn in such a manner that we decide them to spawn in. That's actually it. That's what we do today. They don't automatically spawn right now. This is something we'll do after that, but we got a really big episode ahead just to make everything work. So without further ado, guys, let's get right into it. Alright, so today's episode is all going to be about the level manager. Let's open this one up. And this is where we'll do most of the magic. So we're finally spawning stuff today, and this is going to be where we do it. To do that, we need to keep track of a lot of fields. I'm going to start writing them down right now. Actually, we're going to have some private const at the top. Private const float. Distance between, actually before spawn. So how long are we going to see in front of us? Like how many meters are we going to see in front of us before it spawns? Since we are going to end up having some kind of fog in the game, we don't really have to go that far, so 100 meter would be just fine, I think. Also, of course, we can always tweak these values. Private const int initial segment. So how many segment do we want to have when the game starts? Then private const int max segment on screen. So how many segment are we going to have on the screen before we say that's too much? Let's despawn one before spawning the other one. Next up we have it's not any const field anymore. We're gonna have a private transform camera container. This is the one that's gonna know exactly where we are in the map. That's where our value are going to fetch information on whether we need to spawn something or not. And then private int amount of active segments right now. Private int continuous segment. This is going to be used when we have to create some breaks, so you know, like the transition segments. Let's put an S. And then let's do a private int current spawn z to know where we are right now. Private int current level. This is going to be a little bit weird to explain, but this is basically, are we on the ground floor, are we on top of trains right now? It's useful to know when we're about to spawn something. And finally, private int y1, y2, and y3. Exact same thing as private level, but current level, but this one's going to tell us whether our first lane is on the ground floor, is it on the train floor, or you know, any other floor that we want to add on this thing. So these are all the fields we're going to be using for spawning levels. We need a little bit more of a list over here. We have a list of every single piece we might use, but we're also going to need a list of segments. So I'll actually create them down here. List of segments. We're going to have a public list of segment. This one's going to be for the available segment. So the one we can fetch from to spawn, basically. And then let's copy this over, have a available transition. Same thing, it's a list of segments, but this one is only going to be, you know, we only fetch this from this list when we need to create a break for the player. Now we might have different type of segments. When I say transition segment, it doesn't have to be always empty. It could be something in the empty, so it could be like a random ramp or something, because that does not require any effort and the player can't really die on this thing. Okay, and then we have the, let's have a public list of the active segment. So let's just call this one segments. Just like we did have a piece of all the active pieces. Sorry, a list of all the active pieces. Okay. Now I think we should be good. Oh yeah, of course we need some gameplay stuff. So in terms of gameplay, let's just say something like private bull is moving. Because at one point we don't need to move anymore. If our player runs into a wall and he's just dead, we're not going to update this thing anymore. Okay, and might as well add the little thing we mentioned earlier, and I'll make that a constant at the very top. Private const boolean show collider. Let's put that equal to true right now. And if we want to toggle it off, let's just change it here. So this is going to spawn, if we just make a logic around it, this is going to spawn the basic piece spawner and not really well, we're going to spawn the aesthetic on top of it, but we're going to see the colliders, and that is something that matters to me at the beginning. Alright, so we have all these wonderful fields. It's time to actually put some work into this script. We're going to start with, of course, a awake. Why am I doing an awake, not a start? It is simply because we need to say instance is equal to this, and this way you don't actually mess up anything else. While we're at it, we're going to say camera container is going to be equal to the main camera, so camera.main.transform. Really important that if you actually do it using this shortcut, that your camera in the game has the main camera tag, else it is not going to work. In case it doesn't have the camera tag and you're using two camera for some reason, you can also use something else like current transform. It's going to take the current cameras, the one that has the more, well, the higher priority basically. But hey, we do have our main camera tag on it, so we'll leave it like that. And then we'll say current level, or sorry, current spawn is equal to 0, and also why not do the current level is equal to 0. We're just going to start everything fresh, even though the values are by default 0 when we just initiate them without anything there. But you know, just staying clean here, making sure we have some nice flow. And then what should we do next? I'm going to actually go in a start now at this point. Private void start. This is just one frame after the awake. This is, well, maybe not one frame depending on how long it takes to load, but this is, you know, just after the awake. We are going to spawn every single segment. So let's do 4, and then I just double tap on the tab, so just 4, then you click tab 2 times, and it's going to create a for loop for you. I'm going to say as long as I is smaller than the initial amount of segment, let's go ahead and generate a segment. We don't need these since we're only going to be calling this on a single line. But we don't have a generate segment function, do we? We don't have one just yet. Let's go ahead and call this generate segment. Not with an S, that would be stupid. And let's go ahead and lay down that function right here. So private void generate segment. Alright, so how do we go about generating a segment? Well, first off, we need to spawn the actual object beneath it. And I'll have another function called generate segment down here. Now, I know this is kind of weird, this is kind of misleading. Generate segment isn't really spawn segment. And the reason I'd like to split those apart is because we'll do more in generate segment, more than just spawning. And what I mean by more is when we do spawn something, I'm going to do continuous segment plus plus, basically. But at the same time, if we go past a certain point, where we need to have a transition segment, I would also like to create it here. So here's what I'll be doing. I'll do a random range in between 0 and 1. Let's make sure we add f to it so they know that it's actually float and they don't give me like a int out of that. If those is smaller than, say, continuous segment times 0.25f. So this is going to give us a chance. Actually, this is going to give us a chance to have a segment every... Well, you could have it after 1, you could have it after 2, 3, 4, but 5 is the maximum amount of segment you could have before having a transition segment. So in between here, I'll say spawn transition seg. And we'll say continuous segment is going to be equal to 0 since we're starting over again. And we're going to spawn transition. Transition, just like this. So again, that's going to be another function. Else, if we don't spawn a transition, let's go ahead and do a continuation, continuous segment plus plus. So this is what I meant by doing, like just giving me some room when I spawn a segment. Simply to say, well, is now the time to create a transition? If it is, let's create it right away and reset our continuous segment. Else, let's just go ahead and do a plus plus on this thing. So right now we don't generate anything, but we need to create these two functions for spawn segment and also spawn transition. So let's do a private void spawn segment, just beneath it a private void spawn transition. And it's starting to get a little bit messy in the script, but hey, we're gonna get through it, don't worry about it. So okay, when we do spawn a segment, I'd like to fetch my list, see if there's something that I can actually use, because you can't just go ahead and take any segment. It has to fit with the last one based on the levels. So if your last segment they all ended up on the first floor, basically on top of trains. You could literally just pound one beneath it, doesn't matter because you're falling. But if it's the other way around, so if your segment, you're all on the floor and then you want to spawn a new one that starts all on the first floor, basically on top of the trains, you can't do that because there's no way for the player to actually get on there without, you know, running into trains or having super boots to jump. So we're gonna go ahead and have a look inside of the list of segment, possible segment, and then we'll do all the available one. Let's do a find all and do a delegate. So if x is equal to begin y1 and y1, or x begin y2 is equal to y2, or, and I'm using, in case you're wondering why it takes me so long to make those little pipe sign, it is because I don't have it on my keyboard. I have a French keyboard, so I'm using alt codes. If you're like me, you're gonna start loving using alt code. This is alt 124. Just in case you're wondering. Right, so once we have all the possible segments, something that matches one of the lane with one of the current lane we have, then we're gonna go ahead and actually say, well, int id is going to be equal to a random number, so random range in between 0 and the possible amount of segment dot count. So we just take a random index in, you know, in that possible segment. Alright, so at this point we can say segment s is going to be equal to, say, possible segment at the index id, but this is not going to work simply because that object right here, the possible segment, it does not exist. Those are all based off available segments which are not in the map just yet. They're not in the scene. They have not been initiated. So we run into another problem here. How do we get those to be initiated without causing any kind of memory leak or, you know, any kind of overflow? Well, we do it the same exact way we've done with the pieces, and we create a polling system. So we're going to take a little break of this function and go down here just next to the getPiece function, where we will be creating a public segment function, getSegment. This one's going to take in two parameters. First, what is the int id of this thing? What's the id of this thing? We just created it, we just have it, the id is random. And then we'll also take in bool transition to know, is this a transition segment? Because they share the same id basically. So, same exact thing as we done here. In fact, I'd like to copy most of this. Is that gonna work? No, never mind what I just said. Let's not copy, let's just write it again. So segment r is gonna be equal to null at first, and then we'll do r, look through all the segments available right now. Remember, this is all the ones that are already spawn list. Then we do a find with the delegate if x.segid is equal to id, and x.transition. If it's a transition, then let's just make sure that the one we're fetching in the segment list is also a transition, and also is that one inactive right now. So x game object active self. Again, it is a negative sign in front of it because we don't want to have anything that is currently spawned and currently running. Amazing. Let's keep on going. If it is null, so if r is equal to null, we have to spawn it. We don't have any choice but to spawn it. Having a little bit of problem with my autocomplete for some reason. So let's go ahead and do game object. Geo is going to be equal to instantiate, and now we instantiate one of the two things, right? So we have to choose, we have to instantiate something that is under available segment or available transition. We have the ID, we just need to know which one in this list is the one that we're using. So to know this, we actually have the boolean called transition. So we'll do a ternary operator in this thing. It's going to look very, very clustered, and it's going to be quite fun to look at, to be honest. So if we are doing a transition, we have to pull from available transition at the index id dot game object. Else, we pull it from available segment at id dot game object again. And we make sure to cast this whole thing as a game object in the end. Oops, game object with a capital G. Okay. So that's our game object. It is being spawned from either this list or this list, depending on transition boolean. Amazing. Now let's go ahead and get the actual segment. So R is equal to go get component segment. If you're wondering why I call this R, simply because it is a return value. I could have called it S actually. If we want to go all the way like with this flow down here, I called it P for pieces. I could have called it S, and this is what I'll be doing right here just for the sake of being constant. There we go. It's now called S. Amazing stuff. Next up, we have the seg ID is going to be equal to that ID. S transition is going to be equal, transition is going to be equal to transition. And I can finally put that inside of the segment using this method. Alright, so at this point, we created something, we added it to our list. Let's go ahead and do an else statement down here. If we already have it, we're going to remove it first from the list, and I'll tell you why in a second. So we're removing it from the list, and then we're adding it again, but we're adding it at the first index. Now you're going to notice there is quite a difference in between how we do things down here with a pieces.add versus the things we do up here with an insert instead. Those are doing the same basic thing, so we're adding it to the list. However, insert is going to let you choose where exactly you're going to be adding it. And what I'm saying right here is I'd like to add it at the very beginning of the array, of the list, sorry. So why am I doing this? This is basically to keep track of which segment has been spawned last and which one I can remove first. And this is actually all there is to it. So I'm making sure that I put them in the right order so I can spawn them and despawn them properly. Now, when they're already spawned, when they're already in the pool, they usually lie somewhere, in the queue somewhere very, very far. So I gotta make sure I remove them first and then I put them back at the beginning if I am to reuse them again. Else this would cause a lot of problem with my whole pooling system. Okay, so this being done, let's make sure we do a nice little return S at the end, so return the segment. And we're going to close this off for now, go back to spawn segment like nothing happened. This function works, we don't even have to touch it anymore. Amazing stuff. We haven't tested it either, but guys, we haven't really tested anything in like 3 episodes anyway. Let's just hope everything's gonna be super clean when we try to run this. Okay, so back on spawn segment, instead of doing this, we'll say get segments because we wanted to use our pooling system at ID, and this is not a transition because we're spawning a normal segment. Once we're done with this, we're going to take that segment and make sure we modify our y1 value, y2, and y3. So we'll do s and 1, not y, not begin. We're doing end at this time because we are going to be there once the segment is done spawning. Finally, y3, s, and y3. S the transform, set parent, the usual stuff. Parent's going to be this object. S the transform, local position is what we'll modify, not the actual real position because we're moving the object. And then we're going to be spawning it in front of us at the current spawn z, which also means we need to modify the spawn z for the length of this object. Remember, in the segments we also have the length parameters. So if we have like 30 meters, we have to tell the current spawn z that we're now 30 meters in front. This way he can actually adjust this thing. Now the number of active segment goes up by 1 plus, and we'll do s.spawn. The final step is going to make sure to spawn everything inside of the segment. Okay, so that's a lot of code. Can we actually copy this over for the transition? I believe we can. Let's actually take all of this, put it in spawn transition, and let's make sure we do a lot of modification. So instead of calling it possible seg, I'll say possible transition. We'll pull this from the available transition, and exact same thing for the condition. Those conditions are fine. Now in terms of ID, same thing. We do a get segment ID, but this this boolean has to be true because we're pulling right now from the transition array, not from the other one. This is fine. This is fine. This is very fine. Fine. Okay, everything is actually good. Right, so we have our two big function. Let's should we actually give this a try? I believe that if we do that right now, everything's gonna break. Well, you know what? Let's actually give it a try. But of course, before that, we need to be setting some stuff right here in the inspector. So we'll have to create some conditions. And I'm currently looking for my level manager in this thing, but we haven't created it yet. So let's go ahead, right click, empty, level manager in this thing. And here we go. Let's move it back to the origin, add the level manager script. And oh my, there is quite a lot of lists on there. So we're gonna go ahead and do what we can here. In terms of ramps, let's go open up our prefab folder, go under pieces. In terms of ramp, do we actually want to be using these or the pieces spawner? We're actually using these, the actual normal pieces. So how many ramps do we have? We have 2. Oh, not 20, I said 2. And let's put them in order. So P0 at first, P1. Long blocks, how many? We have 2 of those. P0, P1. Really important that we save this thing after. I don't want to lose all these settings with you. We have 1 jump, which is P0. We have 1 slide, which is again P0. Then in terms of pieces, we don't actually want to see this one. I don't want to be seeing this one. Let's go back in the level manager. I'll just make sure to hide this one. So hide in inspector, and I'll do the same for the segments over here. Alright, so it looks already a little bit better. Okay, so next up we have the available segment and available transition. These one are not done because we didn't create any just yet. So let's actually go ahead and start creating the most basic segments we can. How do we go about creating these? It is quite simple. We first create an empty game object. We are going to add the segment script to it. This one is going to be not a transition one, it's going to be a normal one. And we're going to put a basic ramp here. So let's call this center ramp, and let's make this, I don't know how long it could be, like 10 meters. We might change it, but say we want to have something that is, say, 10 meters, we'll probably change it like in not even a minute. And that's our object right here. It has the segment script on it. Now what we have to do, we don't drag pieces in there. We don't want pieces. We're dragging pieces spawner instead. So let's add a ramp beneath this guy. We can start off with a ramp right here. That would be fine. We have the center, we have the ramp. And then we can go with long block. Why not? Same thing, it has to be inside of it. Moving it right there. So how long is this? This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. This is 8 meter longs right now. We can give it a buffer room of 2, so that would be 10 meters. We can also take this, say, create another one for the same segment. Why not? There's nothing stopping us from being a little bit crazy. Right now what I'm doing is I'm using control to move this because we have to stay on the lanes basically, and every lane is 2 meters, I believe. Is it 2 meters? What did we set? Every lane's okay, it's actually 3 meters, so we have to move 1, 2, 3 like that. That might be a little bit too much. I'll put the lanes on 2 meters instead, I think. Yep, let's do that. I'm on the my player motor. Put the lanes on 2 meters. And then we had a buffer room of 2 meters at the end. We can actually use it for this lane. Why not? So we end up with something like this. Might add another long block. Why not? You know, you just place things around like this. And now we have to fill in the metadata, we call it. So how long is this? This is 10 meters. Let's type it in here. It's not a transition, so I'm not checking this thing. It begins on 0 for the lane 1. So lane 1 is here. It begins on 0. Lane 2 also 0. Lane 3 also 0. Now for the lane 1 and 3, it ends on the first floor. So I'll just put 1 in here and 1. We have the very first segment prefab. Let's drag and drop this thing under segment. Now this one is really cluttered. Like, it's not really fun to play with if we spawn another one. It's way too cluttered. Like, we could give it more room, we could give it more space, but hey, this is what I just done right now, so I'll just deal with it. Right, so we have the center ramp 10. Let's create another one. I'll just slightly modify it, why not just remove the center thing? So I remove this thing, I'll remove this thing, and also the depth collider, the whole long block actually. And we can actually just have that. Why not? So I'll call this one center something. Also 10 meters, why not? We start at 1, we also end up, we start at 0, 0, 0, we end up at 1, 0, 1, because we end up here, 0, and then 1. Let's drag and drop this thing for one more segment. What else could we do? Let's create one with a rock in between. So I'll be removing this ramp. I'll be adding, say, a slide. Why not a slide? That would be fun. Adding a slide right in the middle. That's going to be center slide. Let's make this 15 meter because we like to have some change, right? For this one, going to change this to 15. For the begin, it's the same thing. We always begin on this thing, and 1 is here, and N3 is over there. Right, let's drag and drop this thing under a segment. And before we go any further, we just wanted to test out things, so we're not going to make any more. But one more actually, that is going to be a transition. So center slide, let's call this empty 10. It's going to be a transition that has nothing in it. It's going to be length of 10. Make sure we check this thing, remove everything else, and we can now put that right here. Might want to be splitting this in folders. Actually, just for transition, I'll put that here. Okay, cool. So we have these things ready. Let's go ahead and fill the level manager with our things. We have the ramps, that's fine. Long blocks, jump, slide, available segment. We currently have only 3 of those, so let's put them in here. They have some really weird naming, but who cares at that point. Available transition, we want to have only 1 at this point, empty 10, and save this. Right, so I'm really scared of hitting that play button, but we'll do it anyway, and hopefully nothing explodes. Okay, so we have something like this. It actually looks not bad. This is actually what we did. So if we just have a look before we start playing anything, right? Right here we have a center slide, so that's the first segment. Second segment, empty, because right here we have a transition. So 1, 2, transition, 1, 2. I think that's also a transition. I could not be sure, but sometimes we have 3 in a row and then a transition. You know what? We could have a look at it because it spawns it in the right order. So 1, 2, transition, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's a forced transition at that point because it just goes beyond the scope. 1, 2, 3, transition, and then one more. Why do we have only 15? Because that's what we set in the actual spawner. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 13. Never mind. Okay, we don't have 15 just yet, but that is beyond what we spawn, I believe. So initial amount of segment, okay, 10, and then the rest must be before 100 meters. Let's give this a try. Hopefully I don't die right away like I just did right now. Amazing stuff. It's really hard to tell right now, but we're gonna play with this. So that's fine, okay. It's gonna go above this thing. No problem, easy game, and I have to slide beneath this. So let's slide. I died, what the hell? Okay, well, something's weird here. Can I actually slide beneath this thing? We have one right here, we'll see. Okay, I don't think like I can slide beneath this thing. I messed up this object. We're gonna have to go back and actually fix that. How awful is this? So I'll quickly just turn off the level manager so I can test this out on its own. And I don't feel like I can slide at all beneath this thing. Alright, let's give it a try. Okay, just has to be a little bit higher. Before we go, like, these errors are really good to test at first, because if we were to make a lot of prefab without seeing that error, we'd have to go back and change it everywhere. Now, a good thing is we only have one slide in the prefab, and it's this one. So I'll just remove it right now. I'll go under my pieces spawner, go under slide, put it say here, and we'll modify that on its own. So we didn't bump it up enough earlier. We can do something like it's only going to be 0.6, or we can keep that actually, but just bump it a little bit higher to say 1.5, just to make sure basically that our player cannot go without sliding, so that's fine. Now remember, like, the graphics are going to be different. This is not what you'll see in the game. So even if it's a little bit too high, we don't see it. As long as the player can't go without sliding, that is fine. Right, so we have this new modification here. Let's put it back at the center, hit apply. And now we have to put it back inside of the center slide. So I'll be actually moving it back there. Okay, so this is why it looks weird, because we have like room in front of it. Well, let's move that back to the origin. Make sure our prefab are always very clean. And here we go. Right, so one more. We save this. Everything should be fine. Press play. Well, first, boot the level manager back up and then press play. We're sliding beneath this thing. It worked. Do we have any more? We do have some more slides coming up. So I just make sure not to mess this one up. Slide like a pro. We have another one coming up there. Sliding. And where is my spawning? There is no more spawning. That is the problem right now, but as you can tell, we do get some nice objects on the screen, and it is quite good. So that is a very good step forward. And I just realized we've been recording for a lot of time, so this is actually where we'll be ending today's episode, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Click on the screen. Sorry for that long video. I wasn't expecting it to be that long, but click on the screen right now to head over to the next video, in which we are going to make the continuous spawning and despawning of those objects. And also, if we have a little bit more time, then we're going to go ahead and add the aesthetic on top of it. So thank you so much for watching. Click the video right now. Check out the Facebook page, Patreon page, Discord, all those kind of stuff that just, connects us as a big ass family. Amazing. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.